Put him in the water. Make sure he doesn't come back up. Strickland said it without looking up from his desk. Didn't blink, didn't pause. Just signed the order, capped his pen, and poured himself a drink, while Captain Owen Callahan, a father, a soldier, a man who had simply told the truth, was being dragged toward the river 3 miles away. That night, they called it an accident. They buried the files. They buried the man. They buried everything. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They left his daughter alive. And for 31 years, she had been learning to breathe underwater. If this story hits you deep, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see just how far this story travels. Let's begin. The bayou does not forgive mistakes. That is the first thing Frank Callahan ever told Maya when she was 9 years old and had nearly drowned trying to chase a catfish into the deep channel behind their property. He had pulled her out by the back of her shirt, set her on the bank, and looked at her with those flat gray eyes of his eyes that had seen things no man should ever have to carry alone. And he said it plainly, without drama, without the kind of softness most fathers would have wrapped around the lesson. The bayou does not forgive mistakes, Maya. It only keeps what it's given. She had coughed up muddy water and nodded like she understood. She didn't. Not then, but she would. She would come to understand every single syllable of that warning in ways Frank himself could never have predicted when he pulled a soaking wet little girl out of the dark water that afternoon. That was 22 years ago. Now, Maya Callahan was 31 years old, and the bayou was her home in a way that most people would never understand. Not the house, a low-weathered structure of cypress wood and tin roofing that Frank had built with his own hands decades ago, perched on stilts above the waterline, like an old man refusing to give in to the flood. The house was just shelter. The water was her home. The dark, slow-moving channels, the submerged cypress roots, the thick silt bottom that swallowed sound and light and left only silence. That was where Maya Callahan lived in the truest sense of the word. She was beneath the surface now, 4 feet down, motionless, her back resting lightly against the submerged log. Her rifle held in a 2-handed grip across her chest, the barrel angled upward at 45 degrees toward the gray-green ceiling of murky water above her. Her eyes were open behind a custom-fitted dive mask. Her breathing, if you could call it that, was reduced to something barely measurable. 7 seconds in, hold for 12, release over 8, again. 7, 12, 8. A rhythm so slow and controlled that her body had stopped registering it as effort. It had become simply the way her body worked, the way her heart moved, the way her blood circulated through her limbs. Most trained divers could hold their breath comfortably for 2 minutes. Navy SEALs with years of conditioning pushed that to 3, sometimes 4 in optimal conditions. Maya Callahan had been underwater for 9 minutes and 40 seconds without surfacing, and she wasn't done. Above her, she could hear, because sound travels differently through water, bone deep and distorted, but somehow more honest, the footsteps of Frank moving along the bank. Heavy, deliberate steps. The cadence of a man who had once moved through worse terrain than this, with far worse things hunting him. He stopped about 20 feet upstream, and she could feel the vibration of his voice before she could distinguish the words. She surfaced slowly. Not fast. Fast meant splash. Splash meant noise. Noise meant failure, and failure in the bayou had consequences. She rose like the water itself was releasing her, like she was something the bayou had chosen to give back, rather than something trying to escape it. Her head broke the surface without a sound. Frank was standing on the bank with his arms crossed and a stopwatch in one hand. He clicked it without looking at her. 11 minutes, 14 seconds, he said, his voice completely flat. 2 seconds slower than yesterday. Current shifted, Maya said. She pulled the mask up onto her forehead and wiped her face with her forearm. Took more energy to hold position. I know. He finally looked at her. I shifted it. There's a diverted channel about 60 yards north. I opened the gate this morning. She stared at him. You made the conditions harder without telling me. Yes. Why? Because nobody's going to tell you when the conditions change in the field, he said. The water moves however it moves. Your job is to adapt, not to plan around it. He tucked the stopwatch into his shirt pocket. Get out. We need to talk. There was something in his voice that didn't match the clinical tone of the training session. Something she hadn't heard from Frank Callahan in a long time. If she had to name it, and naming emotions was not something Frank had ever encouraged, she would have called it weight. Like a man carrying something heavy was finally deciding to set it down, not because he wanted to, but because he'd been carrying it too long and his legs were starting to give. She climbed the bank and stood beside him, water running off her tactical wetsuit in thin streams. "What is it?" she asked. He looked out at the water for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a photograph. Bold. The edges were soft with age, the colors flattened by time. He held it out to her without ceremony, the way he did everything without decoration, without warning. She took it. It was a man she had never seen clearly in a photograph before. She knew his face from fragments, a partial image, in a newspaper clipping. Frank had once left out accidentally a name on a plaque at a naval station she had visited once as a teenager. But this photograph was different. This one was personal. The man was young, mid-30s, maybe in full-dress uniform holding a baby. The baby's face was turned toward him, small fist curled against his chest. That's your father," Frank said. "Captain Owen Callahan. And that's you. You were 4 months old." Maya's jaw tightened. She had grown up knowing the outline of the story: father killed in a classified operation ruled accidental. Nothing more available, nothing more discussed. Frank had been his closest friend and had taken her in after Owen's death. That was the structure of it. Those were the facts as she had always known them. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked. "Because something's coming back up," Frank said. "Something I thought was buried long enough that it wouldn't matter anymore." He finally turned to look at her directly. "I was wrong about that. And when I'm wrong about something, people get hurt. I'm trying to get ahead of it this time." She handed the photograph back to him. "Talk." Frank pulled a folded piece of paper from the same pocket. Not a photocopy, not a printed document, a handwritten note on plain white paper in block letters, unsigned. He unfolded it and read it aloud without editorial comment. "Caspian Star departs in 6 days. Project Leafy cargo in transit. If anyone still cares about Owen Callahan, now is the time." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Project Leafy. She had heard those words exactly once before in a conversation she wasn't supposed to have overheard when she was 14 years old. Frank on the phone at 2 a.m, voice low and controlled, but with something underneath it that she had never heard in him before or since. Simmons. Fear. "What is Project Leafy?" she asked. Frank was quiet for a moment, a long moment. Then, "Dane, it's the reason your father is dead." They went inside. The kitchen was the kind of room that told you everything about the man who used it: functional, no waste, every tool within reach, and every tool with a purpose. Frank made coffee the way he did everything else, without flourish, without comment. He set a mug in front of her and remained standing, which meant he wasn't comfortable sitting down for this conversation, which meant the conversation was going to be harder than she was expecting. "Start from the beginning," Maya said. "I will," Frank said, "but I need you to understand something first. Everything I'm about to tell you, I kept it from you because I believed that was the right call. I still believe it was right for the time. I'm telling you now because the time has changed." He picked up his own mug. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm giving you information. That's all this is." "Fine," she said. "Talk." He talked. Project Leafy had begun in the early 1980s as a classified Department of Defense research initiative. The public version of its origin, if it had ever been made public, which it had not, would have described it as a chemical deterrence program, a defensive research effort to understand adversary capabilities during the Cold War. The reality was considerably different. The reality involved experimental compounds, offshore testing on populations that had no idea they were being used as subjects, and a chain of documentation that, if it ever became public, would have ended careers, triggered congressional investigations, and potentially resulted in criminal prosecution of individuals who by the mid-1990s had risen to positions of significant power within the defense establishment. Owen Callahan had been a naval intelligence officer assigned peripherally to a program that intersected with Leafy's logistics chain. He hadn't been read into the program itself, not officially, but Owen Callahan had been, in Frank's words, the kind of man who paid attention to things he wasn't supposed to notice. He had followed a thread, a discrepancy in a supply manifest, a series of cargo shipments that didn't align with the documented mission parameters of the operation they were attached to. He had pulled that thread quietly, carefully, the way a careful man does, and the thread had led him somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. He brought it to me at first, Frank said. His voice didn't change. It stayed level, but his hand tightened around the mug. He said he had documentation, physical documentation, paper copies of manifests and authorization orders that he'd pulled from a records room in Norfolk. He said he didn't know who to trust inside the chain of command, so he was going to me first because I was outside it. What did you tell him? Maya asked. Frank set the mug down. I told him to give me 48 hours. I was going to make contact with someone I trusted at the Inspector General's office. Someone clean. I told him to sit tight and not move the documents. The kitchen was very quiet. He didn't get the 48 hours, Maya said. No, Frank said. He didn't. 17 days after Owen Callahan had shown Frank the documents, he was dead. The official cause, an accident during a night training and exercise. A boat capsizing in rough water. Body recovered downstream. Consistent with accidental drowning. Investigation closed inside of 3 weeks. The documents? Maya asked. Gone, Frank said. His apartment had been searched and cleaned. His locker at the base. Everything. Professional job. No trace. He looked at her steadily. I've spent 31 years believing whoever did it had managed to destroy everything. That there was nothing left. That Owen had given his life for a secret that was going to stay buried. He nodded at the folded note on the table between them. That note arrived 4 days ago, delivered to my mailbox, no postage. Someone put it there by hand. Maya looked at the note, then back at Frank. You think Owen kept copies? I think Owen was smarter than anyone gave him credit for, Frank said. I think he knew he might be walking into something he couldn't walk out of. And I think he made provision for that possibility. He paused. I think whatever he hid is on that ship. The briefing came this next morning. Not from Frank, from a woman named Commander Sylvia Vance, who arrived at a rented office space in a strip mall 40 minutes outside of New Orleans, driving a rental car with government plates and carrying a leather portfolio that she set on the folding table in the center of the room with the careful deliberateness of someone who had thought very hard about every item currently inside it. She was in her late 40s, dark-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested military background, even in civilian clothes. She looked at Maya with an expression that was professionally neutral, and she looked at Frank with an expression that was something more complicated, the look of someone who had history with a person that she had not yet decided how to categorize. You two know each other, Maya said. We've worked together, Vance said. Once, a long time ago. She was my handler on a joint agency operation in '98, Frank said without apparent emotion. She was good at her job. He was difficult, Vance said with what might have been the beginning of a dry smile, but effective. She opened the portfolio. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give you the operational picture, and then we're going to discuss where you fit into it. The Caspian Star was a cargo vessel 12,000 tons currently in the Gulf of Mexico and scheduled to make a port call at a private maritime facility outside of Mobile, Alabama in approximately 5 days. On paper, it was carrying industrial equipment, machine parts, processed metals, legitimate trade cargo. The maritime documentation was clean. The vessel's ownership trail ran through 3 shell companies and eventually dead-ended in Cyprus, which was not unusual for international shipping, but was also, in Vance's words, a flag pattern we've seen before in operations connected to individuals with ties to the Leafy era. There's a naval interdiction operation already in planning, Vance continued, led by a senior chief named Garrett Holt, 6-man SEAL element. They'll board the vessel at night 40 miles offshore before it makes port. Standard maritime interdiction protocol. You're telling us about it, Maya said, which means you're not confident it's going to go the way the planning documents say it will. Vance looked at her for a moment. You're as direct as Frank described. I grew up with him, Maya said. What's wrong with the operation? Vance closed the portfolio. She seemed to be making a decision in real time, the kind of decision that had been sitting on the edge of something for a while and now needed to go one direction or the other. The orders authorizing this interdiction, she said, came from above my pay grade, significantly above. The operational parameters include very specific language about cargo documentation, specifically that all materials recovered are to be transported directly to a classified facility for assessment with no interim processing, no chain of custody documentation available to standard intelligence review, and no debrief of SEAL team members for a minimum of 30 days post-operation. Frank hadn't moved from where he was leaning against the wall. "That's not standard protocol," he said. "No," Vance said. "It's the opposite of standard protocol. Standard protocol exists specifically to create a chain of custody that prevents materials from disappearing into a classified facility and never being heard from again." She looked between them. Someone wrote those orders knowing exactly what they were doing, someone who has done it before. "Strickland," Frank said. Vance didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. She simply said, "The name on the authorization memo is not one I'm comfortable speaking aloud in a location without a secure room. But I will say that the individual who signed it has been in positions of authority connected to classified logistics programs for the past 3 decades. And his name appears in a cross-reference I ran when I started pulling threads on this operation." "Cross-referenced against what?" Maya asked. Vance looked at her steadily. "Against the classified incident report from the night Owen Callahan died." The room was very still. Maya didn't let it show on her face. She had learned that from Frank, the value of a face that gave away nothing, not because emotion was weakness, but because in a room full of people reading, every expression was a card played from your hand. She kept her cards. She breathed evenly. She said, "What do you need from us?" "The SEAL operation is going to proceed regardless of what we do," Vance said. "I can't stop it. If I try to stop it, whoever is above me in this chain will know I've been pulling threads, and that will end my ability to do anything at all." She leaned forward slightly. "What I need is someone outside the operational structure. Someone who can monitor what happens on that ship from a position that doesn't appear in any planning document. Someone who can act if the situation requires action that the official operation cannot or will not take." Maya looked at Frank. Frank was looking at Vance with an expression that on anyone else might have been called respect. "You're asking her to run a parallel operation," Frank said. "Off the books. No official sanction, no support structure, no extraction plan." "Yes," Vance said. "If it goes wrong." "There is no if it goes wrong clause," Vance said. "There is only the operation and what comes after it." She looked at Maya. "I know this is a great deal to take in. I know I'm asking you to walk into something with incomplete information against opponents who have had 30 years to prepare their position. I know the risk is real." Maya picked up the photograph of Owen Callahan that she had set on the table when she came in. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it face down. "I've been training for something for 22 years, she said. "Frank just never told me what it was." Frank, still against the wall, said nothing. But something shifted in his eyes, something small and quiet, that on a different man might have been called grief. She spent the next 4 days in the water. Not training exactly. Preparation, the kind of preparation that has no name in any official military manual, because it is not the kind of thing that can be codified or tested or measured with a stopwatch. It is the process of a human being aligning themselves with a specific environment so completely that the environment begins to accept them, not as a foreign body to be resisted, but as a natural element to be incorporated. Maya knew the bayou the way a musician knows their instrument. She knew which channels ran deep and which ran shallow. She knew where the current came from and where it went. She knew the sounds, the birds, the frogs, the intermittent splash of something large moving through the water at night, the specific silence that fell in the hour before dawn when even the bayou seemed to hold its breath. She also knew now that the bayou connected to the inland waterway system, and that the inland waterway system, if you follow the right channels, led eventually to the Mississippi River network, to the Gulf, to every body of water in the southern United States. She was thinking about that connection, sitting with it, turning it over in her mind the way Frank had taught her to turn tactical problems, not looking for the solution, but letting the solution find the angle it wanted to come in from. On the third evening, she was sitting on the bank just before sunset when Frank came and sat beside her. This was unusual. Frank did not generally sit beside people. He stood, or he paced, or he positioned himself at a distance that communicated watchfulness without warmth. Sitting beside someone was an act of proximity he rarely chose. She waited. "I want to tell you something about your father," Frank said. "Not the mission, not the documents. Something about who he was." She looked at him sideways. "Okay." "Owen was the funniest man I ever knew," Frank said. "Not loud funny, not the kind of man who tells jokes, but he had a way of seeing things, ordinary things, the way things worked, the way people behaved in saying exactly the right words that made you see what he was seeing, and it was always funnier than anything you could have written down. He was quiet for a moment. He made people feel like themselves, but a better version. Does that make sense? Yes, Maya said quietly. He talked about you every time I saw him. From the day you were born until... Frank stopped, then continued. He called you his best mission, said it was the first thing he'd ever done that he was completely certain was right. His jaw moved. He would have been a good father to you. I know I wasn't. I knew what to teach you, but not how to... He stopped again. Maya looked at the water. You kept me alive, she said. You kept me focused. You gave me the tools I needed to be able to do what needs to be done. She paused. That's not nothing, Frank. He didn't respond to that, but he stayed sitting beside her for a long time, after which, from Frank Callahan, was the loudest thing he could possibly have said. On the fourth morning, the burner phone Vance had left for them rang once. Maya picked it up. They're boarding in 48 hours, Vance said. Her voice was tight in a way that it hadn't been in the strip mall office. There's been a development. We've received intelligence suggesting there may be a secondary asset in play. Someone outside the U.S. operational structure who's been tracking this cargo for over a decade. Who? Maya asked. A pause. His name is Viktor Syrokin. He's Russian-connected former FSB, currently operating as a freelance intelligence broker. He's been hunting the Leafy documentation for years, not for Russia, not for any government, as far as we can tell, for reasons that appear to be personal. Another pause. Be aware that he may be moving toward the same objective, and he may not distinguish between you and the people you're trying to stop. Understood, Maya said. Maya, Vance's voice dropped. There's something else. We ran the cross-reference I mentioned, the one against Owen's incident report. A long pause. The operational detail that oversaw the circumstances of your father's death, the man who signed off on the classified after action, had access to a very specific kind of off-books logistics network. The kind that would allow a container ship to move materials through international waters without standard customs documentation. She stopped. The same pattern appears in the Caspian Star shipping trail. It's the same person, Maya said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Vance said, it's the same person. Maya ended the call. She sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, holding the burner phone in both hands, and she was very still. Not the stillness of training, not the disciplined stillness of 9 minutes beneath the water. A different kind. The stillness of a person who has just had something confirmed that they have been carrying as a suspicion for most of their conscious life, and whose body doesn't quite know yet what to do with the weight of confirmation. Then she set the phone down. She stood up. She went to the door and looked out at the bayou, where the morning light was sitting on top of the water, in thin silver lines between the cypress shadows. The water kept moving, slow and dark and patient. 31 years, she thought. 31 years this water has been moving right here every day through everything, while her father was buried under classified documents in official silence, while Frank carried it alone, while the man responsible climbed higher and higher into the structure that was supposed to prevent exactly what he had done. 31 years. She turned away from the door and went to get her gear. The night before the SEAL team boarded the Caspian Star, Maya was already in the water. Not the Gulf, not yet. The bayou. She had gone in at 11 p.m. with the full kit wetsuit dive mask rebreather unit, the rifle in its waterproof case strapped across her back, and she had moved through the channel network in the dark, covering 3 miles underwater and over water, in alternating stretches, navigating by the feel of the current and the memory of maps she had been studying for 4 days until they were as familiar as the lines on her own hands. She came to rest at a position she had identified on her second day of preparation, a submerged bank bend where the main channel curved, creating a natural concealment point with a clear line of observation along a 600-meter stretch of water. She settled into position. She slowed her breathing. She let the water accept her. And she listened. Through the earpiece, waterproofed military grade, connected to a frequency she had been given by Vance, she could hear the low-controlled communications of Garrett Holt's SEAL team as they approached the Caspian Star in the dark Gulf water. She heard Holt's voice clipped and professional, calling out movement indicators as his team closed the distance to the ship. She heard the acknowledgments from his men, short, calm, The language of people who had done this before and trusted each other absolutely. She heard the moment they boarded. She heard the moment everything went wrong. Clear, Holt said. Container section is clear. Beginning inventory check. A pause, then Holt to command, we have an anomaly. First 10 containers are wait. Another pause. Longer. Command, be advised. Containers are empty. All of them. Stand by. And then from somewhere above the frequency, from somewhere deeper in the chain of command that Holt was connected to, Maya heard something she had not expected to hear. She heard a voice she didn't recognize, give an order she couldn't quite make out, and she heard the sound of the channel going controlled chaos in the span of about 30 seconds. And then she heard the first gunshot. She was already moving before the second one fired. Not toward the ship. That wasn't her position. She wasn't supposed to go to the ship. She was moving towards something else entirely. Something she had already understood in the deep, patient way the bayou had taught her to understand things slowly through water and silence, and the particular clarity that comes from holding perfectly still while everything around you moves. The ship was empty, which meant the cargo was somewhere else, which meant she already knew where to look. The water closed over her head. She was gone. The bayou does not forgive mistakes. It only keeps what it's given. And tonight, for the first time in 31 years, it was finally time to take something back. The earpiece went silent for exactly 4 seconds after the first gunshot. Then Holt's voice came back, controlled, but just barely. The kind of controlled that a man achieves not because he is calm, but because his training has built a wall between his emotions and his mouth. And right now, that wall was doing serious work. Contact, port side, multiple shooters. We are taking fire. Command, do you copy? Static. Then a voice Maya didn't recognize, not the operations coordinator she had been briefed on, not the naval liaison whose name appeared in Vance's documentation. A different voice, smoother, too calm for the situation, which meant it was calm on purpose, which meant whoever was speaking already knew exactly what was happening on that ship. Copy, Holt. Hold your position. Reinforcement package is inbound. Negative command, we need extraction, not reinforcement. The cargo is not here. The ship is empty. This is a hold your position, Senior Chief. That is a direct order. The channel clicked, and then there was only the sound of gunfire through the earpiece, distant and distorted by water and frequency. And Maya submerged 4 feet below the bayou surface, listening to men she had never met fight for their lives on a ship that had been designed specifically to be the place where they died. She surfaced, checked her compass, moved. She had 40 minutes before the real cargo reached the first checkpoint. 40 minutes in approximately 6 miles of dark water between her and the only thing that actually mattered tonight. She went back under and ran. The thing about moving through the bayou at night underwater is that your mind does something it doesn't do in daylight or on land. It strips everything down. There is no peripheral vision, no horizon, no sense of the wider world beyond the 6 inches of dark water immediately in front of your face. There is only the direction you are moving, the pressure of the current against your body, and the thought you're carrying, and the thought Maya was carrying. As she moved through that dark water with everything she owned, strapped to her back was the voice of a man she had never heard before tonight, giving an order to leave 6 men to die on an empty ship. Not panic, not grief, not even anger exactly. Something colder than anger. Something that had been sitting at the bottom of her chest for 31 years, growing heavier and more precise with every training session. Every submerged hour, every morning, Frank had pulled her out of the water and told her she wasn't ready yet. She was ready now. She surfaced again at the 3-mile marker, a cypress route she had tagged with a small piece of reflective tape during her reconnaissance days earlier. Checked her watch. 31 minutes. She had made better time than projected. The current Strickland had shifted in her favor, which struck her in a distant way as appropriate. She pulled the earpiece from her ear, shook the water out of the housing, and replaced it. The seal channel was still active. She could hear Holt barking orders, the controlled aggression of a man who had accepted the situation and was now purely focused on keeping his people breathing. She could hear the return fire, shorter bursts now, more disciplined, which meant Holt had gotten his team into a defensive position and was managing ammunition. She could also hear underneath all of it something that had nothing to do with the firefight on the ship. A second frequency, faint, bleeding through on the edge of the channel Vance had given her. Someone else was on a nearby band, and they were speaking Russian. Maya went still in the water, treading just enough to keep her head above the surface, and she listened. She didn't speak Russian fluently. Frank had given her the basics enough to recognize patterns and catch key words. What she heard was a short exchange, clipped and professional, with two distinct voices. One was giving coordinates. The other was confirming a timeline. And then one of them said a word she recognized clearly because it was a word that didn't need translation. Callahan. They knew her name. She went back under, immediately moving faster now, recalculating everything she thought she knew about tonight's operation. Vance had warned her about Victor Sorokin, had told her he was moving toward the same objective. What Vance had not told her either, because she didn't know, or because she had made the judgment call that Maya didn't need to know, was that Sorokin already had eyes on her specifically, which meant he had better intelligence than anyone had given him credit for, which meant tonight had at least one more variable than she had planned for. She surfaced at the 4-mile marker, 22 minutes on her watch, and she stopped moving. Because she could hear it now. Not through the earpiece, not through the water, with her actual ears above the surface in the real air. An engine, low and heavy, moving at reduced speed through the channel ahead of her, running dark, no navigation lights, no sound signature beyond the deep mechanical rhythm of a large diesel engine doing its best to be quiet. The barge. It was already here. She had been told 40 minutes. It had moved faster than projected, which meant someone had accelerated its timeline, which meant someone on the barge side of this operation had received a signal. And the only signal that could have triggered that acceleration was the contact on the Caspian Star. Someone had told the barge that the distraction was running, that the window was open, that it was time to move. Inside the operational structure that was supposed to be running tonight, she processed that in about 2 seconds. Then she moved, not toward the barge directly, toward the eastern bank, where the channel narrowed to about 60 feet before widening again at the bend. She had identified this position during reconnaissance as the optimal intercept point, shallow enough on the eastern side to give her a purchase point, narrow enough that the barge would have to reduce speed further to navigate the turn, and the overhang of the bank would create a natural blind spot for anyone watching from the deck. She reached the bank in 4 minutes, pulled herself partially out of the water, not fully, just enough to get her arms onto solid ground and stabilize her breathing. She checked the rifle. The waterproof case had done its job. She opened it, assembled the components in the dark by touch alone, running her fingers along surfaces she had handled so many times that they felt like extensions of her own body. Scope, suppressor, magazine. She could hear the barge engine clearly now. Close. Maybe 300 meters and closing slowly. She slid back into the water with the rifle and positioned herself against the bank overhang just below the surface. Lying, her head barely above water, her elbows resting on a submerged root that held her perfectly stable. And she waited. The barge came around the bend. It was larger than she had expected from the briefing documents. River freighter class, maybe 200 feet long, riding low in the water with significant cargo weight. The deck was lit at the bow and stern, with hooded lights pointing downward, minimal signature from above. She counted 3 armed figures on deck in the first 30 seconds of observation. One at the bow, walking a slow patrol. One at the stern, stationary, looking outward at the tree line. One midship, sitting on a container, housing with what appeared to be a long rifle across his lap. 3 visible, which meant more inside. She gave it 90 seconds watching the patrol patterns, building the map in her head. The bow guard moved on a 30-second cycle northeast to northwest. The stern guard wasn't moving at all, which meant he was either very confident or very cold, and in either case, his attention was fixed outward rather than downward toward the water. The midship guard was the problem-seated position, elevated angle covering the widest field of view. She went under. She crossed the 60-foot channel width in a single sustained underwater push, coming up beneath the barge's port hull, where the shadow was deepest and the sound of the engine would cover any noise she made. She found the maintenance ladder exactly where the ship's general schematics, sourced by Vance through channels Maya chose not to ask about, had indicated it would be. Iron rungs slick with water and river algae running from the waterline up to the deck edge. She put her hand on the first rung and stopped, because she heard something above her that she hadn't expected to hear. 2 voices, close, speaking English, which meant they were not the hired foreign security she had been briefed on. American voices, which changed things significantly. One of them she didn't recognize. The other one she did recognize because she had been listening to it through an earpiece for the past hour. But it wasn't coming through the earpiece now. It was coming from above her head, live in real time on the deck of the barge she was about to board. And the voice was saying, "The SEAL team is neutralized. Holt's people are pinned. We have at least 2 hours before anyone realizes the primary asset moved." It was the smooth voice, the one that had told Holt to hold his position, the one that was too calm because it already knew exactly what was happening. The voice that had come through on the operations channel from inside the command structure, from a person who was supposed to be running the official interdiction operation. Maya's hand tightened on the iron rung. There was a traitor in the SEAL operations command chain, not a peripheral figure, not someone with peripheral access. Someone with direct command authority over Garrett Holt and his 6 men. Someone who had just described those men as neutralized with the same tone you'd use to describe a weather report. She stayed below the deck edge, listening. "Sorokin's people have been tracking a secondary asset," the second voice said. "Female, unaffiliated. Someone's been running a parallel track." A pause, then the smooth voice. "How close?" "Close enough to be a problem. We picked up her frequency signature about 40 minutes ago, South Channel." Another pause, longer, then, "Find her. If she's gotten this far, she's not amateur. Don't underestimate the asset. Contain first, then we assess." Maya had heard enough. She went back down, moved along the hull to the bow side, and came up on the opposite end from where the 2 voices had been standing. The bow guard was at the far end of his cycle, moving away from her. She had 12 seconds. She used 11 of them to clear the deck railing and press herself flat against the container housing in the bow section. 12 seconds. The guard turned. He was looking at the tree line. She was directly behind him, 4 feet away, not breathing. He completed his turn, looked north, looked south, radio check. She heard the squelch, heard him click twice in confirmation. Then he started walking back toward midship. She let him go 6 steps. Then she moved. No sound, no warning. Clean and fast, the kind of technique Frank had drilled into her so many thousands of times that it had stopped being a skill and become simply a fact of how her body moved through space. The guard was down and secured in under 4 seconds, and she was back against the container housing before anyone on deck had processed that something had changed. 1 down, 2 visible remaining, plus at least 2 voices inside. She assessed, checked her watch. The SEAL situation was still active. She could hear it through the earpiece Holt's team was holding, but burning through resources. She had a decision window that was measured in minutes, not hours, and she had just heard the man responsible for running this entire operation calmly issue an order to capture or kill her. She decided, midship guard first because elevation was always the priority, then the stern, then inside. She moved along the container housings in a low crouch, using the sound of the engine to cover her movement, keeping her profile below the sight lines of any interior windows. The midship guard was still in his seated position on top of the container, housing elevated good field of view, but also fixed in place, which meant predictable, which meant manageable. She came up behind the container housing from the blind side and scaled it in 3 moves, silent, the rifle slung across her back out of the way. The guard heard something, the last-second shift of weight on the metal surface, and started to turn. He didn't finish the turn. She was back on the deck surface with his radio in her hand before his body settled. 2 down. She clicked the radio twice in what she hoped was a convincing imitation of his previous check-in pattern and waited. From inside the vessel, someone clicked back twice. Routine, they had no idea. She moved to the stern. The stern guard was harder. He was alert in a way that the first 2 hadn't been, standing instead of sitting, shifting his weight, checking his radio more frequently. A professional, not a hired hand. He had the particular stillness of someone who was waiting for something to happen, which meant he was expecting trouble, which meant someone inside had already put him on heightened alert, which meant her window was shrinking. She didn't have time for a patient approach. She had time for one option, and it was the direct one. She moved fast along the deck edge, exposed for 3 full seconds, the longest 3 seconds she had spent above water tonight, and hit him from the side before he got his weapon up. The struggle lasted maybe 6 seconds. He was strong, trained, and nearly got a radio call off before she controlled his hands. Nearly. The radio hit the deck instead of his mouth. She finished it before anyone inside heard anything meaningful. 3 down on deck. She stood in the stern, breathing hard for the first time tonight, and she let herself have 2 full seconds of it. 2 seconds to feel the exertion, acknowledge it, let her heart rate process it. Then she locked it back down. Her earpiece crackled. Holt's voice strained but steady. "Command, be advised, we have confirmed hostile casualties, but 2 of my men are down. I say again, 2 men down. We need extraction now. Where is our air support command? Respond." The smooth voice came back. "Air support is rerouted, Holt. Hold your position." Rerouted. The air support had been rerouted by someone in command authority. While 2 of Holt's men were on the deck of an empty ship bleeding, something happened in Maya's chest. Not the cold thing that had been driving her through the water tonight. Something hotter. Something that threatened to override the precision of everything Frank had taught her, the discipline of 22 years of training. She felt it come up fast, and she felt herself grip the railing of the barge with one hand, and she breathed through it, pushed it down, held it under the same way she held herself under the water deliberately, with the full force of her will, because anger without control was just chaos, and chaos tonight would get people killed. She breathed. She went inside. The interior of the barge was tight quarters between sealed container stacks lit with overhead work lighting that threw hard shadows everywhere. She moved through it the way she moved through the water, slow. Where she needed slow, fast. Where she needed fast, listening for the space before the sound rather than the sound itself. She cleared the first quarter. Second quarter, found the cargo manifest board mounted to the interior wall, stamped documents and plastic sleeves. Numbers she recognized from Vance's briefing materials. This was it. This was the real shipment. Project Leafy. 31 years of buried chemical weapons research, riding in sealed containers through a Louisiana bayou in the middle of the night. She heard footsteps. She pressed into a shadow between 2 container stacks and went completely still. 2 men came through the corridor intersection ahead of her. Neither was the smooth voice. These were security moving with the deliberate purpose of a search pattern. They were looking for her. Someone had found the stern guard. The timeline had just collapsed entirely. She let them pass, waited for the sound of their footsteps to move away. Then she moved in the opposite direction, toward the forward section, toward where she had heard the 2 voices from the water. She found him in the operations room. He was standing with his back to the door, a satellite phone in one hand, speaking in a low, rapid voice. The second man, the one with the American accent she hadn't recognized, was nowhere visible. Just him. Just the smooth voice in a room full of navigation equipment and communications gear, talking to someone on the other end of a satellite call about containment procedures and evidence protocols. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. He heard it, turned, and she saw his face for the first time. She didn't know him, not directly, not personally, but she had seen his photograph in Vance's documents, and she had seen his name on the authorization memo that had sent 6 SEAL operators onto an empty ship to be killed. Mid-50s, fit with the kind of face that had learned a long time ago how to look trustworthy. A career face. A face built for briefing rooms and command structures, and the particular kind of authority that never has to explain itself. The phone was still in his hand. Whoever was on the other end was still speaking. He hadn't said a word since he'd turned. "End the call," Maya said. He looked at her, at the rifle, at the water still dripping off her wetsuit onto the floor of his operations room. And something moved across his face that she had not expected to see on a man like this, not fear exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like recognition. "You're Owen's daughter," he said. "End the call," she said again. He ended it, set the phone down on the console beside him with a deliberateness that was its own kind of calculation, the deliberateness of a man buying himself seconds to assess, to recalibrate, to find the angle. "I knew your father," he said. "I know," Maya said. "You had him killed." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He did something worse. He tilted his head slightly the way a man does when he's decided the conversation has moved into territory where the honest answer is more useful than the defensive one. "Your father was going to expose a program that had already ended. He was going to destroy careers and reputations over something that was over. Done. Whatever was done, it was done in the context of a different time, different threat levels, different—" "Stop," Maya said. He stopped. "Where is it?" she asked. "The archive, The documentation Owen collected. I know it exists. I know it's on this barge. He looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was visible in his eyes, not fear of the rifle she realized, but something more structural. He was assessing the total situation the way a man does when he's spent decades making decisions based on what controls what. He was trying to find the lever. I don't have it, he said. Then who does? He said a name she hadn't expected, and the door behind her opened. She spun, brought the rifle up, and found herself looking at a man she had never seen in person, but whose face she recognized from a photograph Vance had shown her 3 days ago, printed on a single sheet of paper with a classified header and the words, "Consider armed and dangerous," stamped in red across the top. Victor Sorokin. He was unarmed, hands visible, and he was smiling, not the smile of a man who had just cornered someone, but the smile of a man who had been waiting a very long time for a specific conversation to finally be possible. "Miss Callahan," he said in accented but precise English. "I have been trying to reach you. I apologize for the method. The door was the fastest option." He glanced at the man behind her. "I see you have already met the man who killed your father." "Sorokin," the smooth voice said from behind her, and there was something in it now that hadn't been there before, something underneath the career smoothness, something raw. "You have no idea what you're walking into." "On the contrary," Sorokin said pleasantly. He reached into his jacket, slowly, hands visible, the entire time the practiced movements of a man who had done this particular gesture in front of armed people before and survived it and produced a small hard drive sealed in a waterproof case. He held it out toward Maya. "I know exactly what I'm walking into. I've been walking toward this room for 11 years. Maya's rifle was still up. She was aware of the man behind her, aware of the 2 security personnel she had passed in the corridor, aware of Holt's voice still coming through her earpiece, strained and urgent, aware of approximately 6 things that could go catastrophically wrong in the next 30 seconds. But she was also aware of the hard drive in Sorokin's hand. "What is that?" she asked. "Everything," Sorokin said simply. "Every document your father collected, every authorization order, every chain of command signature, every record of what Project Leafy actually was and what it actually did." He looked at her steadily. "Your father made 3 copies before they took him. One they found, one he burned himself to deny them, one he gave to a man he trusted who was not inside the American system." He paused. "He gave it to my father, who was his counterpart on a joint intelligence exchange, who kept it for 20 years and then gave it to me." The room was absolutely silent except for the engine and the distant crackle of Holt's frequency. Maya looked at the hard drive. Then she looked at the man who had ordered her father's death, who was now standing very still in the corner of his own operations room, and she watched something happen to his face that she had not seen there before. It was the look of a man who has just understood that the thing he spent 31 years burying has just surfaced completely, and that there is nothing left to do about it. She took the hard drive from Sorokin's hand. "Get on the floor," she told the man in the corner. He got on the floor. She got on her radio. "Frank," she said, "I need you." 3 seconds of static. Then Frank Callahan's voice, steady as the water, steady as it had always been. "Tell me where," she told him. Then she looked at Victor Sorokin, who was still standing in the doorway of the operations room, with that particular expression of a man who has just completed something he's been building toward for more than a decade. "You could have gotten yourself killed coming in here like that," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "But you were going to shoot him before he told you where the archive was, and then we would have lost everything." He glanced at the hard drive in her hand. "Besides, I have been carrying that for 11 years. I was not going to let someone else finish the job." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the floor where the smooth voice was lying with his hands behind his back and his career face pressed against the metal, and she thought about her father, about Frank, about the photograph of a man holding a 4-month-old baby who would grow up without him, about 31 years of dark water. "One more question," she said to Sorokin. "Yes, the man on the satellite call. Who was he talking to?" Sorokin's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough, that he said is the question we need to answer before anyone else on that call realizes what has just happened here. Maya turned back to the corridor. The 2 security guards were going to figure out eventually that their search pattern wasn't turning up what they were looking for. She had maybe 4 minutes before this room became very crowded. 4 minutes was enough. It had to be. 4 minutes. Maya moved through the corridor with Sorokin 2 steps behind her and the hard drive pressed against her chest inside her wetsuit. The man on the floor of the operations room, the smooth-voiced man who had signed the order that put 6 SEALs on an empty ship to die, was zip-tied with his own belt and a length of cable she had pulled from the communications console. Not elegant, effective. 4 minutes before the 2 security guards completed their search pattern and came back to the operations room. Maybe less if they were good. She pushed through the first quarter junction and stopped. Listened. The engine was louder here, closer to the hull center, which meant sound was harder to isolate. She stood completely still for 3 full seconds, filtering the mechanical noise, separating it from the human noise underneath. Footsteps, left corridor, moving toward them. She put her hand back against Sorokin's chest without turning around, and he stopped immediately, not with surprise, but with the practiced stillness of a man who had operated in high-stakes proximity situations before and knew what a warning gesture felt like. She respected that about him instinctively, the way you respect competence, even when you haven't decided yet whether to trust the person carrying it. The footsteps slowed, stopped. She heard a radio click, the guard checking in, then 2 clicks back from his partner somewhere deeper in the ship. They were converging, tightening the search radius. She had maybe 90 seconds. She turned to Sorokin and kept her voice below a whisper. How many total on this vessel? 8 security when I boarded, he said, equally quiet. You've accounted for 4. The man in the back room, that leaves 3 unaccounted. You said 8 when you boarded. That was when 40 minutes before you came out of the water. A pause. I watched you board from the eastern bank. I've been moving through the interior since they brought the barge into the channel. She processed that. You've been inside this vessel for 40 minutes. Yes. And you waited until I had the man in the corner at gunpoint before you came through the door. I needed to confirm you were who I believed you to be, he said, and I needed him distracted. She looked at him for a moment in the dim corridor light. You used me as a distraction. I used the situation, he said without apology, but also without coldness. There is a difference. If I had come through that door 30 seconds earlier, he would have seen me first, and you would have lost the element of surprise. This way, both of us got what we needed. She didn't have time to decide whether she was annoyed by that. The footsteps were moving again, closer. She took the left corridor at a low run, Sorokin matching her pace without being told, and came through a hatch into the cargo hold. The containers here were sealed white markings, stenciled codes, the kind of industrial anonymity designed specifically to make dangerous things look like ordinary things. She pulled the hatch shut behind them and engaged the manual latch. 3 seconds later, footsteps passed on the other side of the hatch, continued moving. She let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she was holding. Her earpiece crackled. Frank's voice, I'm at the channel marker, northwest approach. Give me a position. Cargo hold midship port side, she said. Come in from the waterline on the stern. There's a maintenance ladder. The stern guard is down. She paused. Frank, there's a second operative with me, non-hostile. His name is Sorokin. Don't shoot him. A beat of silence. Then Frank, with the particular brand of dry restraint that was the closest he came to expressing genuine surprise. You made a friend. I made a temporary alliance, she said. Come in quiet. She looked at Sorokin. My mentor's coming aboard, former special operations. He will make a judgment about you the moment he sees you, and it will be accurate, and if his judgment is that you're a liability, the conversation will be short. Sorokin considered this. What should I do? Keep your hands visible and don't say anything clever, she said. He doesn't like clever. The next 6 minutes were the tightest she had moved through all night. She and Sorokin worked the cargo hold systematically, not looking for exits, but looking for the specific container that matched the manifest codes Vance had flagged in her briefing materials. The real chemical weapons cache. The physical evidence that, combined with the digital archive on the hard drive, would make the case complete and undeniable and impossible to reclassify under any national security designation ever invented. She found it in the 3rd row. Container 7-Foxtrot-19. Exactly where the manifest said it would be. She put her hand on the seal and felt something she hadn't expected, a physical reaction, a cold recognition running through her that this was real. This was the thing. This was what her father had died for and what Frank had carried for 31 years, and what a Russian intelligence broker had spent 11 years hunting across 2 continents. A sealed metal box 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, sitting in the dark hold of a river barge moving through a Louisiana bayou in the middle of the night. "This is it," she said. "Yes," Sorokin said. He was standing beside her and his voice had lost some of its professional evenness. "Not much, just enough to be human." 11 years, he said. It wasn't directed at her. It was the kind of thing a person says when they have been running towards something for so long that arriving feels physically impossible, and they need to say the words aloud to make it real. The hatch behind them opened. Maya had her rifle up before she finished turning. Frank stepped through. He looked at the rifle, then at Maya, then at Sorokin, and he did the assessment in about 2 seconds. The specific, rapid, comprehensive threat evaluation of a man who had spent decades making exactly that judgment in exactly that time frame. Then he lowered his eyes to the container she was standing next to, and something moved across his face that she had never seen there before in 22 years. He knew what it was. The moment he saw it, he knew. He walked to the container and put his hand on it, just rested it there, flat-palmed, the way you'd put your hand on the shoulder of someone you'd been looking for. Maya watched him do it and felt something tighten in her throat that she was not going to let go of right now. Not tonight. Not with 3 unaccounted security personnel somewhere on this vessel. "Frank," she said, her voice came out steadier than she felt. He lifted his hand from the container, turned, his face was operational again, closed down everything back where it was supposed to be, but his eyes were different. Just slightly. Just enough that she saw it. "The man in the operations room," he said. "Who is he?" The voice from the command channel, she said. "The one who rerouted Holt's air support. His name is in Vance's documentation. He's the operations coordinator, or he was supposed to be. He's been running both sides of this." Frank nodded once, not surprise, confirmation of something he had already suspected. "He made a call when you had him down. Satellite phone. To who?" "That's the question," Sorokin said. Frank looked at him for the first time directly. A long look. Then, "You're the Russian." "I am a Russian," Sorokin said. "Not the Russian. There is a distinction." Frank studied him for another 2 seconds. Then he looked at Maya. "And is he clean?" "He gave me the archive," she said, "and he came through the door at the right moment with his hands visible." "That's not what I asked." "It's the best answer I have right now," she said. "We're on a clock." Frank accepted that. He turned to Sorokin. "The satellite call. Who did he call?" Sorokin's expression shifted into something more serious. "The call went to a mobile number with a routing signature I've been tracking for 8 months. It belongs to a domestic communications relay civilian infrastructure, not military. The relay connects to a facility in Northern Virginia." He paused. The call was to Strickland. The name dropped into the cargo hold like a stone into water. Maya had known it was coming. Had known Strickland was at the top of this chain from the moment Vance had first laid out the operation. But hearing the name said aloud in this specific place next to the container that held the physical evidence of everything he had done with Frank Callahan, standing 3 feet away, it landed differently than she had expected. It landed with weight, 31 years of weight. Frank's face did not change. "Where is he now?" "Northern Virginia as of 6 hours ago," Sorokin said. But if he received that call and understood what it meant, if he understood that the operation is compromised, he will move. He has resources, he has people, and he has had 3 decades to build contingency plans for exactly this scenario. "He'll run," Maya said. "He'll try," Frank said quietly. Her earpiece crackled again. Not Frank's channel, the SEAL frequency. Holt's voice, and it was different now, not the controlled aggression of a man managing a firefight, but something rawer, tighter. The voice of a man who has crossed a line in his understanding of what is actually happening to him. "This is Senior Chief Holt. I am declaring a compromised operation. I say again, compromised operation. I have 2 men critically wounded, hostile fire from 3 vectors, and my command channel is non-responsive. Any friendly unit on this frequency, we need immediate extraction at our last known position. I am no longer following command directives from the primary channel. That channel is compromised. I say again, the command channel is compromised. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second. Holt had figured it out. On a burning ship with 2 of his men bleeding out, Garrett Holt had put the pieces together and had the guts to say it on an open frequency where it would be recorded, logged, and impossible to bury. She opened her eyes. We need to get him extraction. I have a contact, Sirikin said immediately. Coast Guard Station civilian frequency. They can reach the Caspian Star position in 22 minutes. She looked at him. You have a Coast Guard contact. I have many contacts, he said. 11 years is a long time. Frank made a sound that coming from any other human being would have been a laugh. Coming from Frank, it was simply an acknowledgement that the situation had moved beyond anything that could be managed through conventional operational categories. Make the call, Maya told Sirikin. He produced a phone from an inside pocket and moved to the far end of the cargo hold for the call. Maya turned to Frank. Strickland, she said. If he runs, he won't get far, Frank said. I've been thinking about his options since the moment we confirmed his name was on that memo. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded map, paper handwritten. Notes, the kind of tactical planning document that Frank Callahan produced because he did not trust digital systems with things that mattered. He has 3 routes out of Northern Virginia that get him to an extraction point within his logistics window. I've already made calls. She stared at him. You already made calls. While you were in the water, he said. I had time. Who did you call Frank? He looked at her steadily. People who knew Owen, he said. People who've been waiting for a reason to move for a long time. People who, it turns out, have been carrying this longer than I realized. He paused. Your father had more friends than Strickland ever knew. Sorokin came back from his call. Coast Guard is moving. 20 minutes to the Caspian Star. Holt's people will have extraction, he paused. There is, however, a complication. Of course there is, Maya said. The 2 security guards I mentioned, the unaccounted 3, now 2, they've found the man in the operations room. I can hear them through the hull communication system. They know we're in the cargo hold. He looked at the hatch. They will attempt entry in approximately 3 minutes, and they will not come in with their hands visible. 3 minutes. Maya looked at the hatch, then at the container beside her, then at Frank. We can't let them breach the hold, she said. Not with the containers here. If this turns into a firefight in an enclosed space with chemical weapons, storage, it won't, Frank said. He was already moving toward the hatch with the particular purposeful calm of a man who has made tactical decisions in worse situations than this and knows exactly what his body is capable of doing. I'll handle the corridor. You get that container documented. Frank, Maya. He said it the way he said everything, flat, direct, without room for negotiation. But underneath the flatness, she heard something she had heard from him only twice before in her life. An edge of something protective that went beyond operational. Something that was simply about her. I've been waiting 31 years to be useful in this specific moment. Let me be useful. She held his gaze for 1 second. Then she nodded. He went through the hatch. She heard the corridor go active immediately, voices, movement, the specific acoustic signature of a confrontation being initiated. She didn't let herself listen past what she needed to hear. She turned to the container, pulled out the compact documentation kit from her waterproof pack, and started working. Photographs, serial numbers, seal integrity records. The chain of custody documentation that would make this container and everything inside it legally and forensically usable in any proceeding from a federal grand jury to an international tribunal. Sorokin worked beside her without being asked. He had his own documentation equipment better than hers, the kind of gear an intelligence professional carries when he's been planning a specific operation for 11 years. From the corridor, she heard Frank's voice, not loud, not distressed, just clear and authoritative. Hands, now, on the floor. Stomach up on the floor. I will not say it twice. A pause. Good. Stay there. Both guards. 45 seconds. She allowed herself a single moment of pure, uncomplicated gratitude for the fact that Frank Callahan was on the right side of this and not the wrong one. Then she went back to work. Sorokin finished his documentation first. He looked at what she was doing, then looked at the hard drive he had given her. The archive and the physical evidence together, he said. This is the complete picture. Everything your father built. Everything he died for. Maya finished the last photograph, put the camera away, looked at the container one more time. My father never got to see it, she said. No, Sirican said, but you will. A pause. And the people responsible will see it in a different way, in a room with no windows and a great deal of time. Frank came back through the hatch. Corridor is clear. We have approximately 8 minutes before the operations room situation escalates to a broader response. The man you left in there has been making noise. Then we move now, Maya said. There is one more thing, Sirican said. He was looking at his phone. His expression had shifted, not alarm exactly, but the look of someone who has received information that requires immediate recalibration of everything they thought they understood about the next 30 minutes. What? Maya asked. The satellite relay I mentioned, the routing I've been tracking. He looked up from the phone. Strickland didn't just receive a call, he sent one, immediately after, to a number I don't have on record. He paused. The number routed through a government server, domestic, law enforcement tier. She felt it before she understood it, a cold recognition moving from the back of her skull forward. He called someone inside a law enforcement agency. Yes? To do what? Sorokin's voice was very even. The call lasted 40 seconds. Based on the routing pattern and the timing, I believe he was issuing an intercept order. He looked at her directly. Not for the barge. The routing doesn't track to any maritime authority. He paused again. It tracks to a highway enforcement channel. Northern Virginia jurisdiction. The room was very still. Frank was the one who said it because Frank always said the thing nobody else wanted to say. He's not running, he's being extracted. Someone is moving him. Someone with law enforcement authority, Sorokin confirmed. Someone who can move a vehicle through a jurisdiction without being stopped. Someone who can make a man disappear from one location and have him surface somewhere with no record of the transition. Maya looked at Frank. Frank looked at the hatch. The calculation was visible in the set of his jaw. Rapid, precise, the same calculation she had seen him run 100 times during training exercises. Except those had been exercises, and this was the real version of everything those exercises had been preparing for. The people I called, Frank said slowly. I need to update them on the route. He pulled out his phone. Frank. She said it sharply enough that he looked up. If Strickland is being moved by someone with law enforcement cover, and that someone knows we're compromised, then we need to move faster than they think we can, he said. He was already dialing, which is fine. They've been underestimating us since the beginning of this. He stepped away for the call. Maya stood in the cargo hold with Sorokin, with the hard drive against her chest, in the documented container beside her, and the sound of Frank's quiet, urgent voice on the phone behind her. She thought about the smooth voice zip-tied in the operations room, who had spent the last hour making calculated decisions about who lived and who died based on what was useful for the structure he served. She thought about Garrett Holt somewhere on the Gulf, holding 2 wounded men together with procedure and willpower, while the extraction she had arranged raced toward him. She thought about Strickland in a vehicle somewhere in Northern Virginia, believing that 31 years of careful architecture was still holding. It wasn't. The architecture had a crack in it the moment Owen Callahan had walked into a records room in Norfolk and pulled a thread. The crack had just taken 31 years to reach the surface, and now the surface was here in a cargo hold in a Louisiana bayou, and the crack was all the way through. Her earpiece. A new voice, not Holt, not Frank, not Vance. A female voice, clipped and professional, identifying itself as Coast Guard Sector New Orleans, confirming receipt of an emergency extraction request for a naval element at a position in the Gulf, and confirming inbound asset ET, a 16 minutes. Holt was going to make it. Both of his men were going to make it. She let that land, let it be real for a moment before she locked it back down and returned to what was next. Frank came back. His face was set in a way that told her the call had gone the way he needed it to go, but that what he was about to tell her was going to require her to move immediately. Strickland's vehicle is on Route 7 heading west, he said. My contact has eyes on it. 2 vehicles, his and a trailing escort. They're moving toward a private airstrip outside of Leesburg. He looked at her. If he gets on a plane, we lose him. Not permanently, but long enough for him to activate contingencies that will make what we have on that hard drive a great deal less decisive. How long to the airstrip, she asked. From his current position, 45 minutes. He paused. From ours, with the right assets, it's possible. But it means we leave now. It means we leave the barge, the container, the man in the operations room. We leave all of it and we move. We can't leave this uncontrolled, Maya said. The container, the man in the back, if someone with the right authority comes and cleans this before it's in proper custody. Vance, Frank said. She looked at him. Vance has been waiting for a call, he said. She told us she couldn't act without evidence of operational compromise. We now have a man zip-tied in an operations room who gave direct orders to sacrifice a SEAL team, a container of classified chemical weapons, with a documented chain of custody and a digital archive with 31 years of evidence. He held her gaze. That's enough for Vance to move. That's more than enough. Maya pulled out the burner phone, dialed Vance's number. It rang once. Tell me you have something, Vance said. No preamble, no warm-up. The voice of a woman who had been sitting next to a phone for the past 2 hours, understanding exactly what was at stake. I have everything, Maya said. Cargo hold midship, port side of the barge. Container 7-Foxtrot-19 is documented and sealed. The operations coordinator, the one who rerouted Holt's air support, is secured in the forward operations room. I have the digital archive. She paused. I need you to take custody of all of it right now. I need you on that barge in the next 30 minutes. A silence. Then you're moving. Strickland is running, Maya said. We have a 45-minute window. Another silence, shorter. I'll need formal authorization to board that vessel. You have a zip-tied man in an operations room who was running a false flag operation against active SEAL operators, Maya said. Use that. A beat. Then something in Vance's voice shifted. The professional restraint cracked just slightly, the way it does when someone who has been waiting for a specific moment finally feels it arrive. I'll be on that barge in 25 minutes, she said. Go. Maya ended the call. She looked at Surikin. You're staying, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. This is my jurisdiction now, he said, which was not technically true in any legal sense, but was true in every human sense, and she accepted it. She held out her hand. He shook it firm, brief, the handshake of two people who have just been through something significant together and don't have the luxury of time to process it properly. Your father would have liked you, Sorokin said quietly. She held on to that for exactly 1 second. Then she let it go. Don't let anyone touch that container before Vance gets here. I will stand on it if necessary, he said. She believed him. She and Frank went out the way she had come in, over the stern railing, down the maintenance ladder into the water. The bayou accepted them back without ceremony, the same dark and patient water it had always been. She surfaced 15 feet from the hull and oriented herself north toward the bank where Frank had staged his approach vehicle. They swam without speaking. When they hit the bank and pulled themselves out of the water, Frank was already on the phone again, updating his contact on Strickland's vehicle position, getting the latest GPS coordinates from someone who was apparently maintaining visual surveillance from a position she didn't know and hadn't asked about. She stripped off the outermost layer of her wetsuit, pulled dry gear from the pack Frank had staged on the bank, and changed in 40 seconds flat. Frank finished the call. He's still on Route 7. We have time, but not much. How long to Leesburg? 3 hours by road. He paused. Or we move faster. She looked at him. What does faster look like? He had the smallest possible expression that on any other face would have been a grin. There's a state police contact about 12 miles north of here, former ranger. He owes me a significant favor from a situation in 2003 that I've never called in. He paused. Tonight seems like the right occasion. Maya looked at the dark water behind them. The barge was still there, moving slowly through the channel, carrying its weight, carrying Sorokin and Vance and the man in the operations room and 31 years of buried truth. She turned away from it and looked at Frank. Then let's go collect, she said. He was already moving. The state police cruiser was running dark at 110 miles an hour, and Maya was in the back seat with wet hair and a hard drive pressed against her ribs, watching the Virginia countryside blur past the window, while Frank sat in the front passenger seat talking to a man named Dale Hutchins, like they were catching up over coffee. Dale Hutchins was 53 years old, Virginia State Police, and had the build of a man who had never entirely stopped being the ranger he was at 22. He had not asked a single question when Frank had called him 40 minutes ago. He had simply said where and when, and had been at the extraction point in 11 minutes, which told Maya everything she needed to know about the nature of the favor Frank was calling in tonight. Some favors run deep, the kind that get made in situations where someone's life is on the line, and the debt never expires because expiration would feel like a betrayal of the moment it was created in. Whatever had happened between Frank and Dale Hutchins in 2003, it was that kind. He's still on Route 7. Dale set eyes on the road, one hand on the wheel with the complete relaxation of a man who had driven fast in worse conditions than this. My contact has visual on the escort vehicle. 2 plane-wrapped sedans, government plates moving at normal traffic speed. They're not rushing. Because they don't know we're coming, Frank said. They don't know anyone's coming, Dale said. That's the problem. A man who doesn't know he's being intercepted is a man who's going to be surprised. Surprised men make bad decisions. He glanced sideways at Frank. What's the play when we reach them? We stop the vehicle, Frank said. We detain the passenger. We do it clean, and we do it with the authority of the documentation we're carrying. Dale was quiet for a moment. Frank, stopping a vehicle with government escort plates on a state highway at 2 in the morning, I can do that. But if the man in that vehicle makes one call to the right number, my career ends before we get to the booking process. His ability to make calls ends the moment we stop the vehicle, Frank said. And by the time anyone in his network is aware enough to respond, Vance will have filed formal documentation with the Inspector General and the Senate Armed Services Committee simultaneously. He paused. This isn't a street stop, Dale. This is the end of a 30-year operation. The documentation exists. The physical evidence is in custody. The chain of command for the cover-up is documented on a drive that is currently inside Maya's wetsuit. Frank looked at Dale steadily. You're not going to lose your career over this. You're going to be on the right side of a story that's going to run in every newspaper in the country inside of 72 hours. Dale processed that for about 4 seconds. Then, all right, but I want it on record that you told me that. Noted, Frank said. Maya leaned forward from the back seat. How far out are we? 14 minutes to his current position, Dale said. But he's moving. If he hits the Leesburg bypass before we intercept, he'll be at the airstrip in 8 minutes after that. Private strip, no commercial traffic, no FAA mandatory hold time. He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. If he gets airborne, where does he go? Somewhere without an extradition treaty, Maya said. Dale pressed the accelerator another notch. She sat back and looked at the dark road ahead and thought about what she was about to do. Not the tactical mechanics of it, those were Frank's domain and Dale's domain, and she was a passenger right now, which was a position she was not accustomed to occupying and was choosing to accept because the road required it. She was thinking about the moment itself, the moment she had been moving toward for 22 years without knowing that's what she was doing. Every hour underwater, every submerged training session, every time Frank had told her the bayou doesn't forgive mistakes and she had gone back in to prove she could handle what it gave her. All of it had been heading toward a specific intersection of time and road and a man in a government car who had said 4 words 31 years ago and then spent 3 decades building walls around those words. She was 12 minutes from that intersection now. Her phone buzzed. Vance. I'm on the barge, Vance said without preamble. Her voice was tight in a way that had nothing to do with the situation on the barge that was contained, that was handled. The tightness was something else. Maya, I need to tell you something before you do whatever you're about to do. Talk fast, Maya said. The operations coordinator, the man you left in the back room, he's been talking. A pause. He started talking the moment I identified myself and read him the documentation. He's trying to trade. He wants a deal before anyone else gets to him with a better offer. What's he trading? Maya asked. He's giving us the full internal structure of the operation. Names, dates, authorization chains going back 22 years. He's giving us everything. Another pause. Maya, the list of names is longer than anyone knew. It's not just Strickland at the top. There are 7 other individuals with direct knowledge of the Owen Callahan situation. 2 of them are currently serving in positions that have oversight authority over the investigation that would normally handle something like this. Maya let that land. He's saying the investigation would be compromised. He's saying we cannot route this through standard channels without tipping off people who will move to destroy evidence and discredit witnesses before any formal proceeding can begin. Vance's voice dropped. He's saying Strickland isn't the only one running tonight. He's saying there are others who were already alerted the moment the operation on the Caspian Star went sideways, and they've been moving since then. How many? Maya asked. 3 that he knows of, with certainty, possibly more. She looked at Frank. He was watching her face, reading the conversation from her expression, the way he'd always been able to do, not the specifics, but the weight. He raised an eyebrow. Vance is telling me Strickland isn't alone, she said, covering the phone briefly. 3 others in motion, possibly more. Frank's jaw tightened. He turned to Dale. We need to accelerate the documentation filing. Right now, before anyone else moves. Dale reached under his dashboard and produced a radio handset with a federal frequency marker on its housing. I have a direct line to the U.S. Attorney's field office in Alexandria, he said. Personal contact. I can have someone receiving documentation in 4 minutes. Maya uncovered the phone. Vance, she said, we're filing through a direct U.S. Attorney channel in the next 4 minutes. Get me what you need transmitted. I already have it prepared, Vance said, and the fact that she already had it prepared, the fact that she had been building this package while simultaneously boarding a barge and taking custody of a criminal and managing an active law enforcement situation, told Maya everything she needed to know about why Sylvia Vance had survived and advanced in a system that had been actively working against people like her for 30 years. Stand by for transmission. The next 4 minutes were the most procedurally dense 4 minutes of Maya's life, which was saying something given what the previous 3 hours had looked like. She relayed information between Vance and Dale's federal contact, cross-referenced document numbers against what was on the hard drive, confirmed chain of custody timestamps, and did all of it while sitting in the back of a police cruiser doing 115 miles an hour through the Virginia night. When it was done, Dale's contact confirmed receipt and said 4 words that landed with a weight. Maya felt physically in her chest. We're opening a file, a federal file, open, official, documented and timestamped, and now existing in a system that was separate from every system Strickland and his network had spent 30 years building their protection inside. He can't close that file, Frank said quietly as if he'd read her thoughts. Not anymore. Not from a car on Route 7, or from a private airstrip, or from anywhere else he ends up tonight. He looked at her. Owen's work is in a federal file, right now, with your name on the submission. She didn't respond to that. She couldn't write at that moment. She pressed her fingers against the hard drive through her jacket, and she looked at the road and she held it together because they weren't done yet. 8 minutes, Dale said. Through her earpiece, she had switched back to the seal frequency, out of habit. She heard a voice she recognized with a jolt of something close to relief. Garrett Holt, no longer in the controlled aggression register of a man managing a firefight, but in the different register of a man who has just been extracted and is processing what that means. He was talking to someone on the Coast Guard vessel, voice low and exhausted. The particular exhaustion of a man who has been running entirely on adrenaline and has just had the adrenaline switch off. Both my men are stable, Holt was saying. Peterson took one in the shoulder. Martinez has a leg wound, neither critical. A pause. I need someone to explain to me what just happened out there. I need a full debrief. I need to know who gave the order to reroute my air support. Maya could not respond to him on that frequency. Her role tonight had been entirely off books, and the time for revealing the parallel operation was not on an open maritime channel. But she heard him and she filed it, and she thought about the moment which was coming, which she could now believe was actually coming, when Garrett Holt would get the full picture and understand exactly what the operation he had been inserted into was actually designed to do to him and his men. 5 minutes, Dale said. He had gone quieter, more focused. The easy conversational register was gone. This was a man preparing to execute a traffic stop that had approximately zero precedent in his 23 years of law enforcement experience. His radio clicked. His contact, visual on the target vehicle, Route 7 eastbound marker 34. 2-vehicle convoy lead sedan is blue, escort is gray, both maintaining 55. Copy, Dale said. He looked at Frank. We intercept at marker 36. There's a wide shoulder, good sight lines. I can box the lead vehicle against the guardrail if the escort tries to interfere. The escort, Frank said. Who's driving it? Unknown known, Dale said. Carson. Could be private, security, could be agency. Doesn't change the play. He was already reconfiguring his approach, angling across the empty lanes of the night highway toward the position he wanted. What I need to know is when I stop that vehicle, what are we expecting? Is the man in the back going to come out clean, or is this going to get complicated? Frank looked at Maya. She thought about Strickland, not as an abstraction, not as the name on a memo, not as the voice on a satellite call, not as the man responsible for 31 years of silence and buried truth. As a human being in a car on a highway who had just received a call telling him the operation was blown and had made a decision to run rather than face what was coming. What did that tell her about who he was right now in this moment? He'll come out clean, she said. He's a man who has spent his entire career making other people take the physical risks. He doesn't have a history of personal violence. His violence has always been administrative. She paused. The escort is the variable. I can handle the escort, Dale said flatly. 2 minutes, Frank said. The radio crackled again. Dale's contact, target vehicle increasing speed 55 to 70. They may have spotted a tail. They spotted something, Dale said, and his voice had gone fully operational. Now the coffee conversation register completely gone. He activated the cruiser's overhead lights, not the full display, just a single forward-facing flasher in the grille, the kind that says law enforcement without saying emergency. Hold on. He accelerated. The next 90 seconds were the kind that compressed time and expand it simultaneously. Maya felt every second individually while also having no real sense of how much of them had passed. The cruiser closed the gap on the two vehicles ahead with a speed that pressed her back against the seat. Dale was on his radio coordinating with his contacts somewhere ahead, boxing the approach. Frank had his hand on the door handle, not gripping it, just resting there. The practiced readiness of a man who had exited moving vehicles in worse circumstances. The lead sedan's brake lights came on. Not a gradual slowdown. A sudden brake, the kind that says the driver has just made a decision and has committed to it. The sedan swerved toward the right shoulder, and for 1/2 second, Maya thought it was going to accelerate. Instead was going to try to punch through, but Dale was already moving to cut the angle, and the sedan's driver clearly looked at the options and chose the one that didn't involve a collision. The sedan stopped on the shoulder. The escort vehicle behind it slowed but didn't stop drifting, uncertain the hesitation of a driver who doesn't have a clear instruction for this scenario. Dale was out of the cruiser before Maya had fully processed that they were stationary. Frank was out 1/2 second later. She pushed her door open and stepped out into the cold Virginia night air, and she stood for a moment on the shoulder of Route 7 with the cruiser's lights playing across the back of a dark blue sedan and the sound of highway wind moving past all of them, and she breathed. Dale was at the escort vehicle, credentials out, voice commanding, and completely controlled. Virginia State Police, step out of the vehicle. Now, hands visible. Frank was at the lead sedan's driver window. She couldn't hear what he said. She saw the window go down. She saw Frank badge the driver, not his own credentials, because Frank technically had no credentials that applied to this situation, but something else, something he produced from inside his jacket that she couldn't see clearly, but that caused the driver to go very still. The rear door of the sedan opened. Harlan Strickland stepped out. He was smaller than she had expected. Not physically, he was a large man, broad-shouldered, with the carriage of someone who had spent decades occupying spaces of authority. But something about him out here on the shoulder of a dark highway, instead of behind a desk or a podium or a command structure, was reduced. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jacket, open collar, and he stood beside the sedan and looked at the situation around him with the rapid assessment of a man whose entire professional life had been built on reading rooms and finding angles. He found no angle here. He looked at Dale, at Frank, and then his eyes moved to Maya standing 10 feet away with the hard drive in her hand and the bayou still in her hair, and something moved across his face that she had spent 22 years without realizing she was waiting to see. Recognition. And behind it something he was working very hard to keep below the surface, but which the cold night air and the flashing lights, in the complete absence of any remaining option, had stripped his control just enough to reveal. Fear, not of her specifically, of what she represented, of the thing she was holding in her hand that meant 31 years of carefully constructed silence was over. Maya Callahan, he said. His voice was controlled, career smooth, even now, even here. You look like your father. She hadn't expected him to say that. She felt it move through her, not devastation, not the collapse of something, but a sharpening, like a scope coming into perfect focus. I know, she said. He looked at the hard drive, then back at her face. Whatever you think is on that drive. I know exactly what is on it, she said. Every authorization order, every manifest, every chain of command signature from the beginning of Project Leafy to the night you made a phone call that put a good man in the water. She took one step toward him. My father's name was Owen Callahan. He was a naval intelligence officer who told the truth and was killed for it. I want to make sure you say his name before tonight is over. Strickland's jaw tightened. You're operating without sanction. Anything you've gathered is currently in a federal file, Frank said from behind Strickland's shoulder. Opened 40 minutes ago by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alexandria, filed under a formal complaint with the Inspector General and the Senate Armed Services Committee, cross-referenced with physical evidence currently in the custody of Commander Sylvia Vance aboard a vessel in Louisiana. He paused. The file has your name on the cover page, Harlan. It has been open long enough that 3 separate parties have confirmed its existence. You cannot close it. Strickland was quiet for a long moment. The highway was empty around them. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and the road had that particular desolate quality that roads have in the deep night, as if the world has temporarily forgotten they exist. Then he said something that Maya had not anticipated. Not a denial, not a demand for a lawyer. He looked directly at her, and he said, "Your father was not supposed to die." The statement sat in the cold air between them. "What?" she said. "The order was to take the documents," Strickland said. "Remove the materials, neutralize the threat to the program. The operative who executed the order." He stopped. His jaw worked. For the first time, the career smoothness cracked all the way through, and what was underneath it was not the monster she had been building in her head for 22 years. It was something more complicated and in some ways more enraging, a man who had made a decision and had been living inside the consequences of that decision for 31 years, and had never once in all that time allowed himself to fully look at what he had actually done. He exceeded the parameters. "I did not authorize." "Stop," Maya said. He stopped. "You signed the order," she said. "The words on the order were, 'Make it look like water.' Your handwriting, your signature, documented on the archive I'm holding." She looked at him steadily. "Whatever you told yourself after whatever distance you put between yourself and what happened that night, this is what you signed." She held up the hard drive. He looked at it, and then something happened that she had not predicted, something that would stay with her long after tonight was resolved and the proceedings had begun and the story had run in every newspaper Frank had promised it would run in. Harlan Strickland, Brigadier General, 4 stars, 3 decades of authority. The man who had signed Owen Callahan's death warrant looked at a hard drive held by a 31-year-old woman dripping bayou water in the middle of a Virginia highway, and his eyes went wet. Not remorse exactly. She wasn't going to give him remorse, but something. The specific weight of a man confronting the full shape of what he had done for the first time without the ability to turn away from it. Dale came up beside her. "I've got the escort vehicle driver secured," he said quietly. "Federal agent. He says he's got authority to transport." He handed her a credential wallet. "This authority is about 4 hours from being completely invalid given what you just filed, but right now he's going to argue it if we don't move fast." "Call your U.S. attorney contact," Maya said. "Right now. I need verbal confirmation that the filing gives you authority to detain anyone connected to the named parties." Dale was already dialing. Frank was beside Strickland. Not holding him, he didn't need to. Strickland wasn't going anywhere. He was standing on the shoulder of the highway, like a man who has finally run out of road and has arrived at the very end of everything, at the thing he has been running from longest. Maya's phone buzzed. "Vance." "Tell me you have him," Vance said. "He's standing in front of me," Maya said. A silence on Vance's end that lasted exactly 2 seconds and carried inside it the weight of everything Sylvia Vance had been carrying since the moment she had first pulled a thread on an operation that didn't add up and found herself staring at a hole in the system that went all the way down. "The other 3, Vance said, the ones in motion, 2 of them have been located, one in Dulles, one in Reagan National. TSA has been alerted through the federal channel Dale opened. They're not getting on planes tonight. The third, Maya asked. Working on it, Vance said. But Maya, it doesn't matter if we get the third tonight or next week. The file is open. The evidence is in custody. The structure is broken. A pause. It's over. Maya looked at Strickland, then at Frank, who was standing with his arms crossed and his face completely flat, looking at the man who had taken his best friend from him 31 years ago. Frank Callahan, who had never once in 22 years allowed himself the luxury of explaining to a child why he was training her to breathe underwater, because the explanation required telling her that the world had done something to her family that he could not fully protect her from, and admitting that had been more than he could carry while also being the only person left to protect her. He was looking at Strickland the way the bayou looks at everything. Patient, absolute, like something that has been waiting long enough that waiting has simply become its nature. Frank, Maya said. He looked at her. It's over, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked back at Strickland, and he said the only thing he had ever needed to say to this man in a voice so quiet that only the three of them could hear it on the empty highway. His name was Owen Callahan, and he was better than you. Strickland said nothing. Dale came back. U.S. Attorney confirms verbal authority. Well, yes, Faiz. We're good to transport. I've got a federal processing facility in Alexandria that's expecting us in 40 minutes. He looked between Maya and Frank and Strickland with the expression of a man who has just participated in something he doesn't fully understand but recognizes as significant. Let's move. Strickland was put in the back of Dale's cruiser without resistance. The federal agent from the escort vehicle was secured in a second vehicle that Dale's contact had brought up from a position 2 miles south. Maya sat in the front passenger seat this time, and Frank got in behind her, and Dale pulled back onto Route 7, heading toward Alexandria. The highway was empty and dark, and the lights of the cruiser swept the road ahead in clean, even arcs. Maya held the hard drive in her lap with both hands, and she looked at it, and she thought about a 4-month-old baby in a photograph, small fist curled against a young man's chest, the two of them looking at each other with the specific, uncomplicated completeness of a father and a daughter who don't yet know that time is going to be taken from them. She thought about Frank saying your father made people feel like themselves, but a better version. She thought about 11 minutes and 14 seconds underwater. She thought about the bayou moving the same way it always moved, slow and dark and patient, carrying everything it was given without complaint and without apology, waiting for the moment when what it had been given could finally come back to the surface. Her phone buzzed one more time, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Miss Callahan, Sorokin's voice, calm as always, but with something underneath it now, something that was either satisfaction or relief, and was probably both. I wanted to tell you something before this evening resolves itself into formal proceedings. Go ahead, she said. My father told me about Owen Callahan when I was 19 years old, Sorokin said. He told me that Owen had given him something to keep and that someday, if the world turned the right direction, someone would come looking for it. He said, a pause. He said, when the daughter is ready, she will find it. She will be like her father. She will follow the right thread. Another pause. I want you to know that your father trusted the right person to keep his work safe. And I want you to know that the man your father was the kind of man who would do what he did, knowing what it would cost him. That kind of man does not disappear. He continues, in the people who carry what he left behind. Maya was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said, for the 11 years. It was a privilege, Sorokin said simply. She ended the call and looked at the road ahead, and she was very still for a long time while the Virginia night moved past the windows, and Dale drove, and Frank sat behind her in silence. And somewhere behind them, in the back of a police cruiser, a man with 4 stars and 31 years of carefully constructed silence was finally irrevocably at the end of his road. The federal processing facility in Alexandria smelled like recycled air and institutional coffee, and Maya had been sitting in a gray corridor outside a gray door for 47 minutes when Vance finally came through it and sat down beside her without saying anything for a long moment. That was how Maya knew it was serious. Vance was not a woman who sat in silence. Vance was a woman who filled space with information, with assessment, with the careful architecture of professional communication that had kept her alive and functional inside a compromised system for 2 decades. Silence from Sylvia Vance meant something had happened that she was still processing, and things that required processing time from a woman like Vance were not small things. Talk, Maya said. Vance looked at her hands. The third name, the one we couldn't locate at the airports. She paused. He came in voluntarily, 40 minutes ago, walked into the FBI field office in Washington with his personal attorney and a prepared statement and asked to speak to someone from the Inspector General's office. Another pause. His statement includes testimony implicating 6 additional individuals beyond the names we already had. 6 Maya, not 2, not 3. 6 people with current active positions in the defense and intelligence establishment who had knowledge of Project Leafy and the subsequent cover-up of Owen Callahan's death. Maya was quiet for a moment. He's trying to be first in the door. He's trying to be first in the door, Vance confirmed, which means he's scared enough of what's coming to trade everything he has for whatever protection he can get. She finally looked at Maya directly. The case just got significantly larger than anything we planned for. This is not going to be a quiet proceeding. This is going to be a very public, very extended, very loud institutional reckoning that is going to touch people and programs and decisions that reach back decades. She paused. I need you to understand what that means for you personally. It means I'm going to be asked to testify, Maya said. Yes, by multiple bodies, Senate committee, federal grand jury, possibly an international tribunal if the chemical weapons documentation triggers the treaty provisions it's going to trigger. Vance held her gaze. It also means you are going to be a public figure whether you want to be or not. The daughter of Owen Callahan, the operative who ran a parallel mission, the woman who came out of the bayou. She paused again. There are people in this building tonight who are already deciding how to categorize you. Some of them are deciding you're a hero, some of them are deciding you're a liability, and some of them, the ones who still have loyalties to the network we just broke open, are deciding you're a threat. I've been a threat for 31 years, Maya said. They just didn't know it yet. Vance almost smiled. Yes, that's accurate. She reached into her portfolio and produced a folded document. This is a formal letter of authorization backdated to cover your operational activities tonight. I've had it prepared for 72 hours. I've been carrying it since the moment I sat across from you in that strip mall office and understood what kind of person you were. She held it out. It won't cover everything, but it covers enough to protect you from the people in this building who are looking for a liability angle. Maya took the document, looked at it, then looked at Vance. You had this ready before the operation began. Yes, you knew it was going to go this direction. I knew it needed to, Vance said. Whether it would, that depended on you. She closed the portfolio. For the record, Maya, what you did tonight, the way you did it, the decisions you made, the things you held together under pressure, your father would have been proud. I know that's something people say. I'm saying it because it's specifically true. The gray door opened before Maya could respond. A man she didn't recognize, federal mid-40s, the institutional bearing of someone who had spent their career in rooms exactly like this one, leaned out and looked at Vance. Commander, we need you in the room. He's asking for specific documentation on the authorization chain, and your name is the senior one on the filing. Vance stood, looked at Maya one more time. Go find Frank, she said. He's been in the parking structure for the last hour. He won't come inside. You know how he is about federal buildings. Maya knew exactly how he was about federal buildings. She found him on the 3rd level of the parking structure, leaning against the hood of Dale's cruiser, with his arms crossed and his eyes on the middle distance that Frank Callahan always seemed to be watching, the particular middle distance that existed somewhere between the present moment and every difficult thing he'd ever carried. Dale had gone inside an hour ago to complete the transport paperwork. Frank had not followed. She walked up and leaned against the hood beside him. They stood like that for a moment without speaking, the way they had stood at the Bayou Bank more times than she could count, over 22 years, the comfortable shared silence of 2 people who had never needed words to communicate the most important things. Vance says there are 6 more names, she said. I heard, Frank said. He had a way of hearing things without appearing to listen. She had never fully understood how he did it. It's going to be a long process. Yes. You're going to have to testify. I know. He was quiet for a moment, then Owen would have hated the publicity. She looked at him sideways. Would he? He was a private man, Frank said. He did what he did because it was right, not because he wanted anyone to know about it. He wasn't, he stopped. He wasn't built for the spotlight. He was built for the work. A pause. He would have been incredibly proud of you, and he would have hated every press conference you're going to have to sit through. He would have told you exactly how to handle it, though. He would have said, say what's true, say it once, say it clearly, and then stop talking. Don't perform it. Just say it. She thought about that. That sounds like advice you gave him. Frank was quiet for a moment. Maybe, he said, we gave each other a lot of advice over the years. Some of it was even useful. He paused. He told me once that the bravest thing a person can do is tell a true thing to people who have invested heavily in the false version. He said it costs more than most people are willing to pay. Another pause. He paid it. He did, Maya said. They were quiet again. Somewhere below them, the city moved through its deep night rhythms, the particular sounds of a federal city at 3:30 in the morning, which were different from any other city's sounds at that hour, carrying the specific weight of a place where decisions are made that reverberate far beyond its boundaries. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, a number she recognized now, Sorokin's. He keeps calling, Frank observed without looking. He has things to say, Maya said. She answered. Sorokin. Miss Callahan? His voice was different than it had been on the earlier calls. The professional evenness was still there, but underneath it, something had relaxed, the specific relaxation of a person who has been holding a posture for so long that releasing it feels almost physical. I am calling from the barge. Commander Vance's team has completed the evidence custody process. The container is sealed and documented. The man from the operations room has been transferred to federal custody. A pause. I wanted to tell you that I will be submitting a formal statement to the appropriate agencies regarding my involvement in the provenance of the archive. My attorney has been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Good, Maya said. There is one more thing, he said. In the archive, among your father's documents, there is a personal letter, not intelligence documentation. A personal letter addressed to you by name. A pause. He wrote it the night before he was killed. My father kept it separate from the operational materials. He understood it was not his to use, it was only his to preserve. His voice was very careful now, the way a person is careful with something that belongs entirely to someone else. I have photographed it, and I am sending it to you now. The original will be preserved in the evidence chain, but the photograph is yours. The line went quiet. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a message. An image file. She looked at it for a long moment without opening it. Open it, Frank said quietly. He was looking at the phone. He knew what it was. She could see it in his face. He had known this letter existed or had suspected, and had said nothing for the same reason he had said nothing about a great many things over 22 years, because some things had to arrive at their own time. She opened it. The photograph was clear enough to read. Her father's handwriting, and she had never seen it before tonight, and it was nothing like she had imagined, which was foolish because she had never had any basis for imagining it. It was precise and small, the handwriting of a man who thought carefully before committing anything to paper. It was dated 31 years ago. She read it. She read it twice. Then she lowered the phone and she looked at the middle distance that Frank was always watching, and she understood for the first time tonight what was out there in that distance. It wasn't the past. It wasn't the things that couldn't be changed. It was something simpler and more durable than either of those things. She didn't read the letter aloud. Some things are not for sharing, even with the person who has been closest to you for 22 years. But she took Frank's hand, not the way you take someone's hand out of sentiment, but the way you take someone's hand when you want to give them something real. And she held it for a moment, and she felt intense with surprise because Frank Callahan had not been touched with gentleness in a very long time, and his body didn't quite remember how to receive it. Then he turned his hand and held hers back. They stood like that in the parking structure for a long time. What the letter said was between Maya Callahan and her father, but what it gave her, what it left in her chest when she finished reading it, permanent and undeniable, and no longer deniable after 31 years of not existing, was the specific knowledge that she had been loved completely and without condition by a man who had faced something that could kill him and had still taken the time to write to a 4-month-old girl who wouldn't be able to read his words for 3 decades. Who had trusted that the words would reach her, who had believed in the last hours of his life That truth had a way of finding its own path to the surface. It always does, he had written at the end. That is the only thing I am certain of. It always does. The next 72 hours moved at the speed that institutional reckonings move, which is to say both faster and slower than anyone outside of them expects. Faster because once a federal file opens and a grand jury is convened and names begin to appear in the record, the structure that protected those names begins to collapse with a momentum that is very difficult to stop. Slower because every individual step in the process, every deposition, every document review, every formal interview happens at the pace of procedure which does not accommodate urgency. Strickland was formally charged within 18 hours of his arrest. The charges were not small: conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, unauthorized handling of classified chemical weapons, conspiracy to defraud the United States government. And because the prosecutor was thorough and the documentation was complete, a separate charge specifically tied to the authorization order that had sent Garrett Holt's SEAL team onto an empty ship to be killed. Conspiracy to murder federal law enforcement officers. He did not speak after the night on Route 7. His attorney spoke for him, and his attorney said things that attorneys say in situations like this, which was to say things that were technically precise and substantively evasive. But the documentation did not require Strickland to speak. The documentation spoke for itself in the precise and unambiguous language of authorization orders and chain of command signatures in 31 years of carefully filed paper that Owen Callahan had placed in the hands of a man he trusted. The operations coordinator from the barge, the smooth voice, the man who had rerouted the air support, formally entered a cooperation agreement on the second day. His testimony filled 43 pages of transcript and named 12 individuals beyond the 6 that the third fugitive had already provided. The Senate Armed Services Committee convened an emergency closed session on the third day, which became an open session on the fifth day, when 3 committee members decided independently that the public interest outweighed the classification concerns, a decision that triggered a procedural argument that lasted several hours before being resolved in favor of transparency by a margin that surprised everyone who thought they knew how that committee operated. On the fourth day, Garrett Holt walked into the federal building in Alexandria on his own, 2 feet his arm in a sling from a graze wound that nobody had mentioned in the chaos of the extraction, and asked to speak to whoever was running the formal investigation. He was shown into a conference room. Sitting across the table from him was Commander Sylvia Vance, who had slept approximately 9 hours in the past 4 days and showed every one of the missing ones on her face. Beside Vance was Maya Callahan. Holt looked at Maya for a long moment when he came in. He sat down, he looked at the table, then he looked at her again. "The extraction," he said. "The Coast Guard. That was you." "A phone call," she said. "My men are alive because of a phone call you made from the inside of a river barge in Louisiana," he said. It wasn't a question. He was just putting it in the correct sequential order, making sure he had the picture right. "Your men are alive because you held them together on a ship that was designed to kill them," she said. "I just made sure someone could reach you." He was quiet for a moment. "The command channel bomb," he said. "The voice that told me to hold a position. That told me air support was rerouted." His jaw tightened. "Who was he?" Vance slid a folder across the table. Holt opened it. His face went through several things in rapid succession, none of which he allowed to become fully visible. The same discipline Maya had heard in his voice on the SEAL frequency when he was managing a firefight with 2 men down. But she saw the sequence: recognition, disbelief, and then something cold and very final that settled in his eyes and stayed there. "He had full command authority over my operation," Holt said. "Yes," Vance said. "He knew where we were going and what we'd find." "He designed what you'd find," Vance said. "The empty containers were his. The hostile force was his. The rerouted air support was his." She paused. "You and your men were supposed to die on that ship, Senior Chief. The operation was not an intelligence failure. It was an execution." Holt closed the folder, put both hands flat on the table, looked at the wall for a long moment. When he looked back, his voice was completely level. "What do you need from me?" "Everything," Vance said. "Every communication you received through that command channel. Every order, every deviation from standard protocol that you noted and perhaps set aside because the chain of command told you to set it aside. Every instinct you overrode because The authorization said you should. She paused. You were a good soldier in a situation that was designed to punish good soldiers. What you saw and what you noted and what you felt matters for the record. Holt looked at Maya. You were running parallel. Yes, she said. Off the books. Completely. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man who is recalibrating his understanding of an entire situation from the beginning, laying new information over everything he thought he knew, and watching the picture change. Your father, he said. Owen Callahan. I read the briefing documents this morning. A pause. He was the original source. He was the beginning of it, Maya said. I was the end. Holt extended his hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was firm and held for a moment longer than a routine handshake, the grip of someone conveying something specific through touch, because the words for it were imprecise. She understood it clearly. On the sixth day, Maya was suspended pending formal review of her operational activities. She had expected this, Vance had prepared her for. It had told her it was procedurally necessary and did not reflect the actual assessment of her conduct, and had made very clear that the authorization letter she had provided would protect Maya from anything beyond a temporary administrative hold. The suspension was a form, not a judgment. Maya understood that. She signed the acknowledgement document without argument. What she had not expected was who delivered it. The senior officer who came to her with the suspension paperwork was a rear admiral named Patricia Chen, whom Maya had never met and whose name did not appear anywhere in the Leafy documentation. Admiral Chen was 61 years old, gray-haired, with a particular kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself because it is already present in every room before the person carrying it walks through the door. She set the paperwork on the table, and she looked at Maya and she said, I knew your father. Maya went still. Not well, Admiral Chen said immediately. We overlapped at a posting in 1991. I was a lieutenant, he was a captain. We worked together for about 4 months. She paused. He was the kind of officer that you remember. Not because he was loud or ambitious, because he was precise and he was honest, and you always knew where you stood with him. She sat down across from Maya, which was not something she needed to do to deliver a suspension notice. She sat down because she had chosen to. I have been in this institution for 38 years. I have watched it do remarkable things, and I have watched it do things that I carry with me in ways I will not describe to you right now. When I saw Owen Callahan's name on the filing that came across my desk 3 days ago, She stopped, composed herself with the practice of someone who has composed herself in professional settings for 38 years. I went home that night and I told my husband what I had seen. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in almost 20 years. Maya looked at her. Did you know what happened to him? I suspected, Merle Chen said. I suspected in the way that people who are paying attention suspect things that their institution is telling them not to look at. I did not have what I needed to do anything about what I suspected, and I am aware. She paused again. I am aware that I did not have what I needed, and I chose not to pursue what I might have found, are not always distinct from each other. That is something I will live with. She met Maya's eyes directly. What you did, the way you pursued this, it is not the way the institution would have wanted it done. You operated outside sanctioned channels. You made decisions that are going to be reviewed very carefully by people who are going to look for reasons to categorize them as problematic. She pushed the suspension paperwork across the table. But institutions are not the whole story. They are where the work happens, but they are not the reason for the work. Owen Callahan knew that. It cost him everything. She stood. The review will conclude in your favor. I will ensure it. She looked at Maya one last time. Your father told the truth. So did you. The institution should be able to say the same about itself. We're working on it. She left. Maya sat with the suspension paperwork in her hands for a long time. On the 7th day, she went home to the bayou. Not because anything was finished, the formal proceedings were going to take months. The testimony schedule was already 3 pages long. The calls from journalists had started and were not going to stop. Not because she needed to hide or recover or retreat, though rest was something her body was beginning to insist on with increasing urgency. She went home because the bayou was where she needed to be for the specific thing she needed to do next. Frank was already there when she arrived. Of course he was. Frank had gone home the day after the Route 7 intercept because there was nothing more he could do inside federal buildings that he couldn't do better from the bayou, And because Frank Callahan in a federal building for more than 24 hours was a structural incompatibility that both Frank and the federal building were better off avoiding. He was sitting on the bank when she came down to the water. Early morning, the light just beginning to come through, that particular quality of bayou morning light that exists nowhere else on earth, soft and golden and filtering through the cypress in a way that makes the whole world look like it's breathing slowly. She sat beside him. "Vance called," he said. "The committee hearing is scheduled for the 14th. They want you there." "I know," she said. "She called me too." "Holt put in a formal commendation for your actions," Frank said, "through official channels." His exact language was, he paused as if recalling precisely, "demonstrated exceptional operational judgment and personal courage in a compromised environment, resulting in the preservation of life and the successful resolution of a complex national security matter." He pushed to have it classified as a combat citation. She looked at him. "Combat citation." "You were in combat," Frank said, "on a vessel under hostile conditions, with no backup, no sanction, no safety net." He paused. "He's not wrong." She was quiet for a moment, then she picked up a stone from the bank flat, smooth, the kind that the bayou produces in the places where the current runs a certain way over a certain kind of substrate, and she held it in her palm and felt its weight. "Frank," she said, "tell me something about him that you've never told me before." He didn't ask who, he knew. He looked at the water for a long time. Then, "He was afraid of flying," Frank said, which was absurd for a naval intelligence officer who spent half his career on aircraft carriers and transport planes. But there it was. Every time we boarded a flight together, he would spend the first 20 minutes reading whatever he'd brought, always a book, never a briefing document. He was strict about that, and he wouldn't look up until we were at altitude and the turbulence had settled. A pause. "He said once that it wasn't the flying he was afraid of. It was the specific moment of takeoff, the point where you've committed to leaving the ground and you can't take it back. He said that moment it was the truest test of whether you trusted the thing you were inside." Maya looked at the water. Did he trust it? "He always got on the plane," Frank said, "every single time." He paused. That was Owen. He was afraid of things the way a person should be afraid of things, honestly, with full awareness of what the fear meant. And then he did them anyway because the work required it. He looked at her. "You're the same way. You always have been. I just didn't tell you because I thought you needed to build it yourself without knowing it was already there." She felt the stone in her hand. She thought about what to do with it, and then she knew. She threw it into the water, not a skipping throw, just a clean arc, and then a splash, the stone going under, immediately the ripples spreading outward in perfect circles across the still surface. "I read his letter every day," she said. "I know," Frank said. "Did you know about it before Sirokin sent it?" A pause. "I suspected he'd written something," Frank said. Owen was the kind of man who would have written something. He would have wanted, he stopped. He would have wanted you to know, not what happened to him, that could wait. He would have wanted you to know that you were wanted, that your existence was the thing he was most certain about in a life full of uncertainty. He paused. Some people leave that unsaid. Owen wouldn't have. She looked at the ripples from the stone moving outward until they reached the bank and became nothing. The water settling back to what it always was. The system failed him, she said. It was the thing she had carried longest. The thing that had lived in the space between what she knew about her father and what she had been unable to do about it for 22 years. She said it aloud now, not because she needed to hear it confirmed. Vance had confirmed it. Frank had confirmed it. The federal file had confirmed it with precision and documentary weight, but because saying true things aloud was how they became fully real. How they moved from being knowledge to being fact. How they stopped being something you carry and became something that carries itself. Frank looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it did. And we fixed it," she said. He held her gaze. Something in his face did the thing it had done by the container on the barge, the thing she had only seen twice before, the small and quiet shift that was the closest Frank Callahan had ever come to letting the weight of something show openly. "As much as it can be fixed," he said, "the rest is what comes next." She nodded. They sat there together in the morning light on the bank of the bayou that had made her beside the water, that had taught her everything it knew about patience and precision and the specific faith required to hold yourself completely still beneath the surface while you wait for the right moment to rise. The water moved the way it always moved, slow and dark and indifferent to everything that had happened above it and around it and because of it. It did not care about federal proceedings or Senate committees or the names of men who had believed their authority was permanent. It moved through the cypress roots and past the old bank and out toward the wider channels the way it had moved for 10,000 years, before any of them were born, and would continue to move for 10,000 years after all of them were gone. But it had given something back. It had given back the truth that Owen Callahan had trusted it to carry. It had given back 31 years of buried evidence and buried names and buried justice. It had given back a daughter who had learned to breathe inside it, who had learned to become invisible within it, who had learned that patience is not passivity and that stillness is not silence, and that the moment of rising when it comes is only possible because of everything that was endured beneath the surface. Maya Callahan was suspended pending review. She had no active operational status. She had a testimony schedule and a legal team and a federal proceeding that was going to occupy the next 18 months of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. She also had a letter from her father. She had the knowledge that his work was in a federal file with his name on it. She had the knowledge that the man who had signed the order that killed him was in federal custody, charged, documented, finished. She had the knowledge that 6 SEAL operators were alive who might not have been. She had the knowledge that a Russian intelligence broker had spent 11 years carrying something across 2 continents because his father had told him it belonged to someone who would eventually come looking for it. She had Frank Callahan sitting beside her on a bayou bank at dawn, not saying anything, which was the loudest possible way Frank Callahan knew how to say that she was not alone. And somewhere in the water beneath them, moving with the current, going wherever the bayou decided to take it, was everything that had been waiting 31 years to reach the surface. It had reached it. Owen Callahan had told the truth, paid everything it cost, and trusted that the truth would find its way home. He had been right. He had always been right. And the daughter he never got to raise had spent 31 years becoming exactly the person required to prove it, not because anyone told her that was what she was becoming, but because some things run deeper than instruction, deeper than training, deeper than any amount of water placed above them to keep them down. Some things rise because rising is simply what they do, because the pressure that was meant to bury them only made them more certain of the surface. Because the truth, when a person has given their life to carry it forward, does not stay buried. It surfaces, it always surfaces. And when it does, it surfaces completely and it does not go back down.